I did not see the introduction that you gave on the website, so I'm not quite sure what you said about me. But it is wonderful to be here this morning. I didn't realize that this church had actually grown out of a small group that was connected with Lombard. So it's wonderful to be with you all, and it's one of the things I regret as a pastor, that I can't be in two places on Sunday morning, and there are so many churches that I'm not able to visit with. So it's good to be with you all. And I thank you as well for your freedom in allowing me to choose a scripture. And I think I've been preaching several texts from Numbers in recent months, so it was sort of at the front of my mind. And I had always wanted to preach on Balaam and his donkey. And so I sat with it, and I emailed Anne and said that's what I was going to preach on, and then I read the text again, and I kind of was hoping that Anne would email back and say, oh, we just had someone preach on Numbers 22. So I'll be a little more informal in this sermon, and I want to invite you into it to consider some of the possibilities of what's going on here. And this is really just my reflection on having sat with this for a week. And I appreciate your thoughts as well. I like this story a lot. Last year I bought a poster that was by a Christian graphic designer that has a particular design on it with a donkey, and it says, "Sometimes God sounds like a donkey," except it doesn't say donkey. But I like the poster because I think that captures a lot of my most tenuous and headstrong moments with God. I think we all have our donkeys, or at least our donkey moments. These people or these instances that speak into our faith life or our vocation in ways that redirect us. And in this story, there's a lot going on, so I want to unpack a little bit of it before I reflect on what all of that may mean for us. I think it was a good point that Balaam is not Israelite, that he's sort of just this guy. I mean, Numbers is the story of the Israelites kind of getting tired of being in the wilderness, and they get a little more irritable and things get a little more interesting. And that's why I've enjoyed the book so much recently. But then you get this interlude of this guy who has no relationship to the Israelites, and you're not even clear on how he first encountered God. But he had some sort of God encounter that at least made it worth his attention to keep paying attention to who this God is among the pantheon of other Canaanite gods in this land. And so Balaam is still on his faith journey. And it seems that this God of the Israelites is rather problematic for his career, or could be, because Balaam is a sort of priest, prophet, witch doctor for hire is what he seems to be. And he goes around to different kings and he solves their problems. So you could also call him an Olivia Pope if you're a Scandal fan. But he's someone who goes around and he solves problems. And this is why the king Balak asks him to come and take care of the Israelites. And so Balaam is, open to doing his job. And so when God says to him, "Go and pay the king a visit, but do only what I tell you to do," we can imagine that Balaam is kind of like, yeah, sure. But God knows Balaam isn't totally paying attention, and Balaam maybe has a long-standing relationship with this king and is prepared to do has always done what this king asked him to do, and is on his way to see his buddy. And God knows Balaam maybe isn't totally into this thing and isn't prepared to fully trust God. So God tries to get Balaam's attention another time. and give him a good reminder. So God sends this angel, and sends this angel, and sends this angel. And 3 times the donkey is paying attention. The donkey doesn't have a career at stake here. The donkey isn't worried about getting there quickly and impressing the king and seeing his friend again. The donkey has the good sense to notice what's going on around her. And it is a she-donkey. I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was all prepared to write him, and then I went, oh, maybe I should go look this up. And in the Hebrew, there is a separate word for female donkey, and I don't know why that's so critical here, but it is a female donkey. So she sees the angel, and the first time she turns into the field to avoid the angel, and Balaam is doing something else. I mean, it's kind of funny that he doesn't really notice until she's into the field, and then he goes, wait a second, this is, when the wheat is brushing his legs, he goes, this is not where we're supposed to be going, and he pulls her around back to the road. And then they're going down through a low road between the 2 vineyards, and the vineyards each have their own little wall. And she sees the angel again. And I really like this image of the donkey coming through this wall and the angel being right here, and the donkey just sidestepping enough that she's really like squeezed all the way over to the wall, scraping Balaam's leg against it, and then just barely sneaks around the angel. And somehow Balaam is able to manipulate her in such a way that she gets around the angel, but then he sets her right again. That it's a very close call for Balaam. And then they continue, and the road continues to narrow, and the angel appears again, and they're going through this high rock pass. There's no turning around. There's not space to avoid the angel. So the donkey just lays down on the ground. And Balaam starts yelling, and he starts beating the donkey, and the donkey opens her mouth and speaks. And it reminds me of this joke that maybe you've heard about the 2 muffins who are in an oven, and the one muffin says to the other, man, it's hot in here. And the other one says, a talking muffin. That's sort of what we're expecting Balaam to do here, to go, a talking donkey. But Balaam is so much in his own world, or he's such a serious guy, whatever it is. I mean, I assume he has not done much talking with donkeys before, but maybe he has. So when the donkey starts talking to him, he engages it in conversation, and he says, you're making a fool of me, and I wish I had my sword in my hand, and I would kill you right now. And apparently he has history with this donkey, so these are pretty harsh words for a donkey that's done well by him up to this point. But the donkey seems to be pretty level-headed about the whole thing, and she says, well, am I not your donkey? And haven't you ridden me for so many days, and don't you know my temperament? Would I do this to you? And now is when Balaam finally gets his attention and looks around, and he sees the angel with the sword in its hand on the rocky path, and it all kind of clicks for him. And there is something a little bit comical in this story that he bows down. The way that you said this, it's not written this way in the NRSV, but he bows down so hard that like his head just falls onto the ground. That Balaam has really, truly made a fool of himself as well. And he apologizes. And the angel says to him, what you were about to do to your donkey, what you were just threatening your donkey with, I would have just stabbed you if your donkey had kept going. And I appreciate that Balaam apologizes, because I think this is a difficult thing. Apologies are a difficult thing. And so it's admirable to see him saying, I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the road to oppose me. And then he goes beyond that. He says, not only have I sinned, but I would like to make a full repentance, and if you want me to go back home, I'll just go home. And in a way, I think this would have been the easiest choice for Balaam to just go home and say, sorry, king, I can't do this one, maybe next time. But what God is asking of him is much more difficult than that. God is saying, no, go see your king, your friend, this guy who rules all of this land, and tell him you can't do it. I mean, but God doesn't say that right now. God says, well, I'll let you know whether or not you can or can't do it. But Balaam has to go to his friend and be prepared to say, well, I may not be able to follow your orders. I may not be taking orders from the king right now. I may have found this God who is much more powerful, and I need to pay attention to him over whatever you and your crown is about. And this story all comes through the witness of a donkey and through the attention of a donkey. And this donkey is in a way one of the lowest of all creatures, because it's a regular sort of workhorse, metaphorically a workhorse animal of a creature, and she is the one to whom God is revealed. And she becomes the catalyst for the powerful and the wealthy to witness to God. And this is a theme that occurs over and over in the Bible, and I like this story of it because we so often neglect the Old Testament as a whole, and Numbers in particular. That this is not just a New Testament theme, but it is throughout from the beginning of human history. The powerful and the wealthy are being overturned because in the process of becoming powerful and wealthy, they are able to deafen themselves to God. And I also like this story because it is a little bit literal, that talking donkeys are to be listened to. And I think it does beg the question, how do we listen differently and better in order to pay attention to these donkeys and these voices who we discount? I think it's interesting the way the service has gone thus far. One of the voices that came to mind immediately of voices that we have trouble listening to is the voice of creation itself, that we as humans tend to be think of ourselves as the voice of creation, and we sort of forget that we are a piece of the whole created scene that God made, and we are just one day of creation, and there are 6 other days that we need to listen to, 5 other days that we need to listen to. And to worship an incarnate God, a God who came on earth as a human, is to worship the whole of creation, is to honor the whole of creation as part of God's work. That everything happens in the particularities of time and space, which means we are attentive not just to the human Jesus, but to the context, the geography of that time, and to the context and geography of our own time. And this is a way of paying attention to God. That we tend to focus on human priority instead of thinking that there are other ways to see creation. And so I wonder what other animal voices we ought to listen to. I think a lot about monarch butterflies because I sort of fell into raising monarchs by accident. But the ways that this butterfly that's now endangered didn't really capture the public imagination until it was endangered. And now all of a sudden we can look at a monarch, this bright orange and black butterfly, and it's one of the few migratory butterflies on the planet. I just think they're the most amazing animals. And that the ones that I was raising in August now have just in the last couple of weeks migrated all the way to southern Mexico to the site where they will overwinter. And this is incredible to me. And what is this voice saying about the rhythms that we live by and the way that we honor and work within the limits of creation? Are there ways, literally, in which we ought to listen to talking animals? I think that may be an interesting practice for all of us the next time we run into an animal, to wonder if it isn't trying to communicate something to us. And if so, what might that be? That might be a little weird and out there. But if we truly believe that messages from God arrive in all kinds of ways, then we best be paying attention, whatever environment we find ourselves in. And I think there is something to be said for paying attention. It's easy. I spent a week longer reading this story and going, okay, so the moral of the story is listen to the talking donkey. And I don't think, I was thinking about it this morning, and I went, it's not the donkey. It's not the talking part that we're supposed to pay attention to. Because if you see this encounter between Balaam and his donkey, he is physically beating her, and she is lying in the road before he is able to hear her voice. That he is at a crisis point of not being able to move himself and do the thing that he is trying to do before he is able to hear her, when she's been trying to say this all along. And so the takeaway for us is not to listen to the donkey when it talks. I think the takeaway is also to pay a little more attention so that we are not at the crisis point before we start listening to the other voices. And I think this is perhaps a serious challenge for our church, finding ourselves in Mennonite Church USA at somewhat of a crisis point. And hearing calls now that we ought to listen to each other when perhaps maybe those were calls that we ought to have heard a decade or more ago. And so I think that is part of this story as well, that we listen to the voices that we disagree with. I've been thinking a lot about an interaction that I had. I wrote a blog several months ago that Mennonite World Review published, and there was someone who commented on the blog who is a pastor in Illinois Conference, and who said, don't you think you're getting a little far away from the confession of faith, and don't you think that you as a pastor need to be a little more careful about the messages that you preach? Which on the one hand is not a thing that you ever want to hear from a peer, much less to hear it in internet comments. But at the same time, the more I think about that interaction, the more I value it. The more I value his willingness to say, this thing that you are saying is disturbing me for this reason. And the more that interaction gives me hope, that he knows he will run into me again, and I know I will run into him again several times every year. And yet we can have these conversations, that we can be somewhat open and candid, and I replied to him as candidly as I could, that having that communication is itself meaningful, and it doesn't need to be a division. Neither of us needs to walk away going, well, I lost something on the internet today, or going, well, let me escalate this a little more and just comment one more time and do 2 separate comments 5 minutes apart. That's not how things evolved. It's an interaction that we had in which we found ourselves to have different perceptions of Christ. And we live with that. And we go on and we continue being part of Illinois Mennonite Conference, and we understand that this is a piece of our faith when there are all these other pieces that are coming together and that are drawing us together as we're also pushed apart on these values. And I'm grateful that he talked to me at that point, and that we hopefully don't find ourselves several years down the road in some conference meeting yelling at each other because we have been unable to hear each other all along. And so it's not really, I would like to say it's about talking donkeys because it's nice to leave people with a good, strong image and something memorable. But I think the truth is, it may not totally be about talking donkeys. It's about donkeys who just do their donkey thing, and people who can pay enough attention to take the cues from regular donkeys.